welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber, and today we have two exciting guests. Eneasz, want to introduce them?
Yeah, we have two authors and podcasters as well. DayStar Eld.
Hey, yeah, I'm DayStar.
And Alexander Wales.
Hey.
I wanted to pull you guys together to talk about rationalist fiction a bit because, okay. First of all, before I get into my welcome spiel, is it rationalist fiction or rational fiction?
That's a great question.
Yeah, okay.
You want to, yeah.
I'll take this one. There are two separate categories, I guess, where rational is the definition I use is like thinky fiction that's focused on thought and how people think and has a lot of thought put into it and is meant to evoke thought as opposed to emotion in some way or in complement to emotion, whereas rationalist is more fiction that teaches rationality or hits on rationality concepts in some way.
So would you say a good example of the first category of rational fiction is like The Martian?
Yeah, that would be a good example of the first category, and then the second category is much rarer. Daystar's Pokemon Origin of Species and Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. I think one of the examples was Flatland, maybe?
Yeah, I've seen that come up on the sub too.
Yeah, my definition tends to fall towards more like if you are writing a rationalist fiction, your main character is much more likely to be explicitly or implicitly rationalist themselves, and so like from whatever perspective it's being written from, you're gonna kind of like pick up on rationalist ideas and like techniques and psychology and like all that kind of stuff like from their perspective as they go about their life and like address challenges and all that stuff. Whereas rational fiction is more just like a top-down approach of this world is going to try to be constructed in a rational manner. These characters are going to try to act rationally, which does not mean unemotionally, right, or inhumanly. It just means not like no idiot ball holding for people who know that trope. And all that sort of thing that like we kind of sort of mostly assume is just like quote unquote part of good fiction. But kind of is really not. Like there's like a whole bunch of great fiction that does not obey some of these rules or any of these rules sometimes. So it's not the same thing as good fiction, but it tends to be similar in many ways. And a lot of really great like stories that Alexander writes, for example, like there's no specific rationalist character, but all the characters and the world itself are really well constructed, and like you can kind of see that like a lot of thought was put into them, and like the characters themselves can still be smart in and of itself, but they might not necessarily be considered rationalist by some people.
Okay.
Right, like the characters in Metropolitan Man. There's no one there who goes off on a spiel about the methods of rationality, but but everyone there is thoughtful in a way that the way that I kind of think about it from the non very fluent in this perspective is that when I'm reading rational or rationalist fiction, I never kind of shake the book and be like, why are you doing this?
Right.
Where
instead you might actually go, why is he doing this? Like, because it's something that you can predict if you think about it. Yes. It's something that you should be able to actually like piece together.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, and the idiot ball trope. I always chuckle because I think of the orb of confusion from SpongeBob. But that's basically where characters act either typically stupidly for the character or uncharacteristically stupidly for the character. I think that's the idiot balls when they do something stupid, really to the point of moving the plot along.
Right.
Because like, oh, yeah, they need to, I don't know, go run upstairs, from the invading monster or whatever, rather than run outside because reasons, because so that sort of thing.
And a lot of it is just if you're writing fiction and you just want to get some emotion or resonance across and you don't care that much, moving the plot along is part of it. And I think a lot of people just screw up writing when they need to move the plot along and they don't know how to do it. And so they just have stuff that doesn't make sense happen to do that. But I think I don't know. It's a weird kind of thing. Like, why do these faults happen and whether or not they are faults in their respective media?
I do like that rationalist fiction has that as a ideal, because lots of times it is just kind of laziness that makes an author do that, use some kind of stupid trope or idiot ball thing to simply move the plot along for the sake of the plot. And like with rational fiction, the author has to sit down and actually come up with a really good reason, which means they get more into their characters' personality and mind, and they get more into the world, and it just makes the fiction better when you're forced to not use shortcuts like that, in my opinion.
I like to think so too, yeah.
Oh, I want to quickly give bona fides, since I jumped in with the question about the definition before I did that part. DayStar Eld is a writer of the big one is Pokemon Origin of the Species, right?
Yep.
Excellent. And Alexander Wales is probably best known for Metropolitan Man, but has written a bunch of other shorter works. And right now you are working on Worth the Candle?
Yep, under the Cthulhu Ray Jepsen pseudonym.
And both of you guys together have a podcast called Rationally Writing, which is about writing rational fiction, which is why you are here today.
Yeah, we try to cover like writing tips in general, but also just from the perspective of rationally writing as best we can.
So the reason I had you guys on specifically is because I've been reading rational fiction since Eliezer invented the genre, basically. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to write for a while, and I've found that I can write fiction sometimes, but like, not only can I not write rational fiction, I still don't entirely know what it is. There seems to be this debate a lot, and I like that definition of like thinky fiction, but there's a lot of fiction out there that's thinky, right? Yeah,
so one thing I want to point out again quickly is that like not all fiction that's good is rational, and obviously not all rational fiction is good. I've happened to have read some of your work, so I enjoyed it a lot, right? So I don't think it's necessary to always try to write rational fiction necessarily, but the principles that you might be trying to like reach towards, I think that like everyone maybe in our subculture, like in our community, that would probably enjoy are generally the ones that we try to have characters that, act intelligently. As Eliezer put it, like level 3 intelligent characters are the ideal, right? But level 2 intelligence at the very least probably qualifies for rational fiction, and absolutely don't want to dip below level 1 intelligence. And these are kind of like guidelines I can describe if you want to, but it really comes down to just like how well you're putting your mind in the character's mind to decide what they're going to do next, right? And then also in terms of world building, like for a rational world, the world building is consistent enough to the point where like there are no obvious plot holes, there are no obvious like inconsistencies and things like that you see all the time in movies or TV shows or many books.
And I think the harder part is not just getting in your character's head, but getting into the head of everyone else who interacts with him, especially the antagonists, because that's where a lot of people fall down, where the antagonists are just, foils for the main character and evil for the sake of evil, and getting into their minds and, like, oftentimes just writing an entire scene from their point of view first as if they were the hero and a real person. It's a lot of fucking work, but God, it makes things better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you summarize the levels, level 1, 2, and 3 intelligence characters?
Off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, and we can always do edit magic for this, level 1 intelligence was basically the character doesn't do anything that's obviously stupid, like idiot ball holding. Level 2 intelligence is where they act to the full capacity of pursuing their goals the way you would expect them to. So they're not like stating, oh, I really want to be a great like firefighter or something, and then just like missing very obvious like things that they should be doing to become a great firefighter. One example of this actually in Pokemon that I see in like fiction for Pokemon all the time is there's this concept of like Pokemon as intelligent creatures, and people write about them as intelligent creatures in fan fiction all the time, but they really don't act like intelligent creatures. They act like intelligent creatures that have no agency, I should say. Like in the sense of like they can speak English or whatever language they're speaking at them, and they can like respond to those commands, but they don't have any goals of their own that they tend to pursue. Their personality really just boils down to they're wild. They just boil down to like, fight until captured. And if they're captured, they're just like, do the best I can for my trainer, or like win this fight or whatever it is. Like they don't have agency, they don't have sapience, despite being treated as characters or described as creatures that do. And if they did have agency and like goals, they would act like the whole world would be structured completely differently based off of like the idea that they're just literally enslaving sapient creatures to fight with. And like, even if you use the excuse of, well, they're fighting because they need to protect themselves from wild Pokemon, where they're fighting for like because they like fighting, like the Pokemon themselves enjoy fighting, a level 3 intelligent character then would be like, okay, well, if that's actually what their goal is, like their goal is they like fighting, so they join trainers to get the best fights they can to get stronger, and that's just what Pokemon's like goals are, then you would still have to imagine then a character intelligent enough to intelligently pursue that goal to all the options available to them, kind of in a like a meta way. So the way I would imagine that going would be something like a level 3 intelligent Pokemon would be one who like had a deal with trainers to actually switch to another trainer if they're stronger than them. Like there was no reason to stay with one trainer after they caught them just because they want to win fights with that trainer. Like if their actual goal is to become strongest and another trainer beat their trainer, they should be allowed to just go to the other trainer if they were free will creatures, like without agency.
So this reminds me of a because I've been fascinated by this whole question of what the hell is rational fiction. I've been kind of following people that talk about it for a while, and back like a couple years ago, I think Eliezer wrote a quick Sword Art Online piece, and someone asked him what part of that was rational, and he said that a brief answer would be that it's looking at a fictional world and seeing another way of interpreting the character's observations as corresponding to different simple generators. So more pragmatically, if you read a lot of rational fic, you'd recognize it as being of a particular tradition where there isn't like a single point of departure, but lots of little reinterpretations that are all in the standard rational fic directions. Like people are smarter, they see the answer sooner, they have additional motivations, and everything ties together a little bit, differently under these new assumptions. And that got me to wondering, almost all the rational fic I see is fanfic. Is that like a requirement, or what is it that makes it so that it is such a big fanfic genre?
Did you say rational or rationalist?
I still probably both. Rationalist, I guess.
Okay, because I think my understanding, just like the takeaway, is that rationalist is like the characters employ the methods of rationality, whether explicitly or like articulate them to each other. And rational fic can just be The Martian or Wild Bow's Worm, that sort of thing, right?
One thing that might help clarify this also is that I think I made a little mistake in how I described level 3 intelligence. It almost is explicitly that you are teaching your characters are so intelligent in general, like they act intelligently and so like completely that they a reading about their actions and thought processes will actually teach you how to be smarter. Like they are copyable skills. They're not just having strokes of genius like that you can't follow. Like they're actually trackable. What the reasons for their smart thinking is, what the reasons for their achieving their goals is, in a way that you as the reader can learn from. And I think that's the bar that separates not just level 3 intelligence from level 2 intelligence. That's the bar that separates rationalist protagonists from smart characters that might just be in a rational world. And I think also, honestly, that's why things like Metropolitan Man actually could be described as rationalist, because like Lex Luthor is doing a lot of really smart shit that like you can actually like follow along with and realize, oh yeah, that makes like a lot of sense. Why don't they do that in the Superman world?
Yeah, it's not.
Cool.
It's not like it's not meant to be like a phony intelligence that's just like, oh, this just happened. Like he's smart and he can do it. It's meant to be shown as much as possible as actual insights that are to some extent copyable. You get that, I think, a lot more in rationalist, because that's more what it's trying to do. Is it's trying to be copyable intelligence rather than just displayed intelligence, I guess. So getting back to the fanfic question, I think part of it is just different ways of looking at the world. And for me, I write fanfic a lot of the time because I read something and I have a question and there's no answer within the text to what my question is. I just watched a movie last night where there's like this shadowy government agency and they do this thing. It's not really important, but I was thinking, why in the world would that be like standard operating procedure for them, right? And this isn't answered in the text. It's not like there's no answer in the movie probably not in supplemental material or anything. But that gets my mind going, and I think, well, okay, this is kind of dumb of them. So, maybe this is a coordination problem happening at some point, or there is some simple generator working in the background that has caused the world to be this way as presented. And actual answer is probably just that the author or writer or director didn't think about it, or they thought about it and they said, it's not important. We're not going to spend our valuable 90 minutes of screen time explaining operational procedures for this agency, even if we have an actual idea for it.
Repeat to yourself, it's just a show, sit back and relax.
Yeah. But I write fanfic a lot because I see those things and it gets my mind going, and I start thinking about how I would make small tweaks to either the background or to the reality as presented that will make it make more sense or to conform to my understanding of the world. Because as presented, it doesn't conform to my understanding of the world because someone maybe got lazy, or they weren't necessarily lazy, but in terms of economy of storytelling, they just didn't want to include some certain thing.
Do you think that's one of the reasons some people don't like rational fic? They look at it and they say that, oh, this author is highlighting and making fun of all the things that weren't entirely, 100% accurate about my fandom, screw them, when really the author is going through the laborious process of making a universe where those seemingly crazy things actually can make good sense for a reason.
Cough, Quidditch, cough.
I mean, I would describe most rational fiction, particularly rational fan fiction, but obviously, as some kind of labor of love. Like, no matter how idiotic or thoughtless parts of the canon might be, it's because you really enjoyed the thing and you wanted the thing to be better. And your interpretation of better might obviously be different from someone else's, but there's kind of this highest form of, you can rewrite Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality and write what I would consider a worse version of it, where you just kind of remove anything that's irrational from the Harry Potter world, and that would just be that would be a different kind of story. One example of this that was kind of done was Felix Felicis was kind of just written out because it's too overpowered if you try to take it seriously and really consider what its inclusion in the world would be. But Eliezer actually did more than that. He didn't just remove all the irrational things. He kept in things that were irrational and then described them in ways that made them totally make sense. And the best example of this, in my opinion, was the chamber leading to the Philosopher's Stone, the obstacle course. It's why would Dumbledore put this obvious place where that people aren't supposed to go, tell everyone about it, fill it with these traps that first year students could clearly pass, not even extraordinary first year students. I guess Hermione is pretty extraordinary, but the other two not so much. I guess they could they needed Ron for the chess and Harry for the keys, sort of, not really. But anyway, clearly first year students can get through this. It was a troll too, but that's they beat the troll by themselves earlier in the bathroom. Anyway, the point is, he described it in a way that made it oh, Dumbledore obviously knew that kids would try to find this place. He made it specifically so that first-year students even could get through it safely. All these traps are there to make you think that you're getting through something that Dumbledore wants you to get through, as just oh, it's just crazy old Dumbledore making this fun little, challenge for the students. But in point of fact, the actual challenge was just the last chamber, and the reason that was there, all the previous chambers were there, is because there are various wards and tricks involved that would identify if someone stronger than a first year student or stronger than a Hogwarts student in general tried to make its way through them in particular ways. And then of course Dumbledore expected Voldemort to maybe go through them, and when Voldemort goes through them with Fiendfire, the point is that he's not afraid of Dumbledore anymore because he's got a trump card up his sleeve. But it basically served two purposes. One that satisfied the canon explanation, and one that satisfied a rationalist explanation.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that a lot of people don't like that, other than the fact that sometimes does come across as bashing, I think when some people write, it is bashing, because I sometimes feel that too when I see something that just makes no sense, as it's canon form. And it frustrates me. and I just want it to go away. I want it to not be part of that canon anymore. That can sometimes come out in the writing. The other part of it is people have different relationships with and reactions to deconstruction and reconstruction. Like, okay, so people will ship Hermione and Draco a lot in the Harry Potter fan fiction community. They'll write about, you know, the otter and the snake, and on the base level, it's just Draco's kind of a bad boy, and Hermione is like super smart and agenty and a bunch of stuff, and they just want to mash these two people together that don't really make that much sense, right? And so you can deconstruct that, and you could write a fic where it's just about how, like, Draco's legitimately a racist from this racist family, and he's not like a good person. He's not, you know, his like bad boy stuff is actually horrible and toxic, and there's no way that they would work together. And if they tried to be together, it would just be this horrible thing, right? That would be the deconstruction of it. And if you show that to people who like Hermione and Draco as a couple, and they like imagining that without the like messy, complicated things, they're not going to like that, and they'll find that as like an assault on their fandom.
Right, not just an assault on the canon, but an assault on their preferred fanon.
Yeah, which you actually get. I mean, you get that even for people who have different preferred pairings for couples within a fandom, or people who have different fandoms like Star Wars and Star Trek, right? Famously do not get along because of the different ethos of their respective canons. But if you do a reconstruction, a lot of, like, if you write a love story between Hermione and Draco that deals with all of the issues of actual legitimate racism and the fact that, like, Draco's father like killed and tortured people, and he sort of grew up in that household, and Hermione is basically disadvantaged within the wizarding world because of her birth, and you deal with all that stuff, people will still see it as sort of an assault on the simplicity and purity that they like in their original love story. So you could do a reconstruction, and people would still get up in arms about it because it's still an assault on the simpler version of the story, I guess. Which I think it comes into play a lot for people, because if you write something like that, a labor of love that sort of takes all the things that you find super interesting and troublesome and tries to reconcile them, a lot of people don't want that reconciliation, because that reconciliation is a tacit admission that there is something that needs reconciling, I guess.
Or it deletes the fun, like the Pokemon thing I was describing earlier. Like, to many people, the inherent fantasy of Pokemon is going on adventures with their intelligent, superpowered best friend animal companions. And if you just say, like, look, that fantasy doesn't work at all if the animal companions are sapient. Like, you can have a fanfic about this where the entire purpose of the story is to, like, establish Pokemon liberation and, like, give them equal rights equal to Pokemon, to humans and all that stuff, if you want to go that route. But most people don't want to go that route. The fantasy requires, essentially, humans to be above Pokemon and yet also be intelligent and all that stuff. So, like, any kind of fiction that tries to mess with that messes with the inherent fantasy of the setting.
Yeah, Superman is a big one. The new DC movies, a lot of people, the problem they have with it, they really like Superman, but they like him as this, like, pure character who doesn't actually have to grapple with difficult moral decisions, right? As soon as you introduce Superman to the trolley problem, that kind of destroys what they find appealing about Superman, I guess, right? Even if you intend for Superman to remain noble and pure and morally correct.
And this obviously only applies to some people. Like, the question was why some people maybe don't like or are rubbed the wrong way by rational fiction. Clearly, like, this is a matter of taste that a lot of different people are going to have different responses to. But I think that's something that's kind of inescapable in fan fiction in general, but also just turned up to 11 for rational fiction because of the aforementioned reasons. And also, obviously, there's the element of there's a sense of arrogance that comes off from writing characters that are, like, supposedly more intelligent than the characters around them, or potentially more intelligent than the reader that's like pointing out things that the reader didn't like recognize when they read the canon. And, you know, some people really relish that and enjoy it. I know I certainly do. But some people obviously also don't. And that's totally fine if they don't want to read it. But that's just a segment of the populace that will not enjoy rational fiction, probably.
I sort of felt that way when reading Methods of Rationality, because I loved those books growing up, but I was in the latter category where I relished seeing all the ways it could be done better. You know, like realizing that in hindsight, you know, Quidditch was just like this, you know, fun game that Rowling thought up, and it was, you know, the Seeker earned so many points so that Harry could be the most important player, right? Like, not because it made any sense as a sport. And, you know, so Harry's flippant dismissal of it in Methods of Rationality, like, who was the first Seeker? The king's idiot son? And that basically turned out to be true. So, you know, I've shown it to people who, you know, read the first few chapters and basically got to where, like, Harry is like, oh, Ron's super boring, fuck this. And they're like, no, screw this isn't for me. They're too good of friends. I'm not going to have this destroy their friendship. But so I could see how it could go that way. I think that you're right, depending on your approach to things, or maybe just how much you are attached to things that you like or liked as a kid or something, having it even very artfully deconstructed and reconstructed can still just be like but that's not what I liked.
You said much earlier, Daystar, that the rational fiction often shows the thought process of the rationalist fiction shows the thought process of a rationalist person, like going through the world and how they react to things. So I often feel like a fake rationalist because I don't think in the ways that are portrayed in rationalist fiction very often.
Oh, believe me, imposter syndrome all around. Don't worry about that.
So, like, is this just impossible for me? Like, I try to incorporate some of these things and they like help my general life attitude, but when it actually comes down to being like that on a day-to-day level, I cannot pull it off, and I get the feeling I'm never going to be able to.
Oh, I mean, I would be very surprised if anyone could pick up a few rationalist stories and just immediately like, bam, like the real phrase I think that is more like, because a lot of people don't like the rationalist label. I chafe under it occasionally too. I think aspiring rationalist is the better one. It's just longer, right? So we don't use it that often. And there's a lot of talk about how rationalist fiction itself can be like presumptuous, but like as a title, you know. But like the idea also is that like as a writer, you have magic powers that you can use to make your characters more intelligent than you. Like you have time that you can use to think through things that your character cannot think through in the time that they actually have available to them in that circumstance, right? There's like cheats that you can use as a writer to make you have access to way more information and other resources and like feedback and stuff like that from other people that makes your characters more intelligent. So it's not necessarily that you're writing characters that are always realistically as intelligent as the person would be in that circumstance. But when you read other fiction, like the hero is way stronger or better at fighting than any realistic person could ever expect to be, and that's just kind of okay. Like he's just like, I mean, that's just that's how it works.
I think I heard it called competence porn before.
Right, like competence porn is so enjoyable for a lot of people because it's not necessarily that you can do that in that circumstance, but at the very least, you enjoy watching someone be competent in a particularly intelligent fashion. And if it's rationalist, if it's level 3, if it's explicit, even if you can't be that smart in your real life, you can still learn things from it. I try very hard in my story to put in whatever little tidbits of psychology and therapy that I have observed being useful to other people, has been useful to me. I've had people respond that like reading those things in my story, they've tried applying them to their life. They found it really useful. They found it really like helpful to them. Like that's what I really care about. I don't really care if I've actually told someone explicitly who private messaged me about it. Like, I don't want anyone to read my story and then be like, can I ever be as smart as the main character? Because that's not as interesting to me. What's interesting to me is like, can you at least be in any way? Can you at least in any way feel like you got something useful out of the story that you can apply to your own life?
I think that may be partly my problem. Like, it feels like what you're saying, a lot of rational fiction is very forward-looking like that. Like, can you get something useful out of it? And lots of times when I write, what I'm doing is, like, reliving traumas in my own past. And that is not a forward-looking thing, you know? That is not something where thinking through problems was the goal of the story, in so much as wallowing in my own misery was.
And some people really enjoy those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
It's like tragedy is a famous genre of story for a reason.
Right. It's just not very rational. Like fucking.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably make a rational tragedy story. It would just be depressing as hell.
He did everything right and was really smart and lost anyway.
Because that's the way reality works.
Yeah.
Wah, wah.
Well, yeah. I mean, for rational fiction, if you want to have someone undone by the seeds of their own destruction, right? If they contain the seeds of their own destruction, that's what undoes them in the end. You just need to make sure that your characters are behaving how actual people behave. And I think that's, maybe this is cynical of me, but I think that's fairly common to actually happen to people, right? Is for how actual tragedies happen. You get some of the recurring themes in fiction are like the sins of the father being visited upon the son. I think that's very true to life in how you have like cycles of poverty, cycles of abuse, cycles of like substance abuse, where a lot of people will take things like that and they'll sort of transplant them into a setting that doesn't make sense, or into a story that doesn't make sense, but like thematically works on that level, I guess. That's what I view as one of the big distinctions between rational fiction and other fiction. And yeah, DayStar is right. If this were a branding meeting and we were sitting down like 5 or 7 years ago or something like that to decide on a label, rational fiction was probably not what we would have decided on.
No,
but
it sounds kind of pretentious. I always go with aspiring rationalist too. And one of my friends once asked me when I mentioned, oh, that guy sounds like totally like an aspiring rationalist. They're like, what the hell is an aspiring rationalist? It's like, it's basically just a rationalist. And they're like, well, why the hell are you saying aspiring? What, is he not good enough to join you? And I was like, no. It's because we're not really all that full of ourselves, you know? We know there's an ideal we cannot achieve. And she was like, that sounds even more pretentious.
Well, you know, it's either that or it's kind of a catch-22 because you can only like admire something that you actually admire as like aspirational, right? Like we can't pretend that like we're not. So like there was a big online argument, which are always fun, a while back about like people who write rational fiction and people who enjoy rational fiction on some other forum. And one of the things that like seemed to really like be a recurring theme in the critics was that like you guys are assuming that like, oh, if you're writing rational fiction, it must be like good, or like it's the best way to do it or something like that. Right. And it's like, look, I'm only telling you what I enjoy in fiction. And to be honest with you, a lot of the really popular things that you can see some these days, like yourmoviesucks.com or CinemaSins, even though they actually have gotten pretty bad recently for a while now, like they basically are really popular because they point out inconsistencies and illogical things and like idiotic things in fiction. Like this isn't a niche like sentiment, you know, like it's not only rationalists and aspiring rationalists that really like appreciate having these things pointed out, but it is something that you have to basically make a choice of like, okay, do I think that this is a better way to write? I kind of do, but I don't want that to at the same time make other people feel like if they don't read rational fiction that non-rational fiction is bad, because I enjoy a lot of non-rational fiction too.
Oh hell yeah.
So it's like, I don't know if I'm trying to like necessarily put one on a hierarchy over another, but I definitely don't want to also pretend to myself that like I don't think the things that makes rational fiction good are not inherently good.
So I want to ask all three of you guys kind of a leading question so that I can preach about what I think rational fiction is. But both Worm and Unsong, and more people are probably familiar with Worm because that's just insanely popular, very big in rational circles and have often been described as rational fiction, but I know Scott Alexander specifically said Unsong is not rational fiction, even though I think it is and lots of other people do. And pretty much the consensus seems to have come down that Worm probably isn't either. and yet they both still feel very rational fiction-esque, and I want to know what you guys think about those two and why they do or don't count as rational fiction.
I can jump in first.
Do it.
So with Worm, so like I guess we can take the word of God on Unsong. If he says it's not rational fic, then if he says so. But like to me,
death of the author, he could be wrong.
Right. So let's go with that. Like the character, they find the whatever the word of power that ensouls something, and he's like, his first thought isn't like, oh my god, I accidentally made this computer sentient, now I've got this problem. He's like, oh shit, souled things are the ones that can do these. Like, so he does immediately the rational thing. If Professor Quirrell was in that universe, he'd have done the exact same fucking thing, right? So I think if you can say, if Professor Quirrell would have done this, that's the rational thing, that might be goodwill to come. So similar to Worm, I mean, the main character is a 14-year-old girl who can control bugs, and she lives in a world with people like Superman and people who can transform into dragons and basically literal dragons and world-ending behemoths. And so like, what is this bug girl gonna do? She's gonna get super fucking creative and do a lot of cool things. And if it can be, so I think in those sense they're at least rational. If they're rationalist, if you have to be teaching to do that, I mean, or at least if you have to be able to learn stuff. I don't know what you could learn from Unsong. I'm sure some people can, but like Worm, I mean, there's, the whole, one of the main lessons to it might be like, know what your limitations are and then figure out what your strengths are and exploit the hell out of those. So, she is aware that she has great, battlefield awareness because she's aware of everything, of every bug in the vicinity. So like she could put a ladybug in everything and she's aware of everybody around. That's, it's easy to imagine somebody in that universe getting the bug power and being like, man, I drew the short straw here. This sucks. What am I going to, what am I going to clear all the spiders out of my house? Great. But I think the exploitation in a way that, especially with Worm too, just like so many times did I, jaw drop and be like, no way, that is awesome. There's a part where she's fighting
in an intelligence way, right? Not necessarily like flashy powers. You mean?
Oh yeah, no, it's the intelligence way, exactly. The example I was going to give was she's fighting this guy who the longer he fights, the stronger he gets, and he transforms into like, I don't think you ever see his final form, but he looks more and more like a dragon the more the fight goes on. He gets like 15 feet tall or something, and he can rip houses apart, and she can't put him down. So there's like this other guy that's like a mutant and his blood is like super toxic. So when she's got the big dragon guy distracted, she has like cockroaches dip a caterpillar or some toilet paper or something in that mutant guy's blood, and then pushes it into the dragon guy's eyeballs, like to get it into his system. Like, that is outside the box thinking. And I would never have thought of that. The only thing I thought of was like, okay, I guess if it comes down to it, I would shove a bunch of bugs down someone's throat and suffocate them. And yeah, she does that, but it is like among the creative things that she does.
I'll answer next, because I think Alexander would probably do like a really great job of rounding out this discussion. There's an element that we haven't discussed so far that is very prevalent in rational fiction that I would call like munchkinry. And munchkinry is absolutely in Worm, and it's absolutely in Unsong. And what munchkinry basically is this term from tabletop gaming where you are essentially, like you kind of said, like taking the things available to you and exploiting the hell out of them, like, and until you basically can min-max your advantages in a way that like catapults you into like success, like that seems way out of proportion to what you would normally, what people might normally be able to consider as you're capable of. And munchkinry is a very strong theme in rational fiction, particularly rationalist fiction. It's kind of where a lot of the fantasy of rational fiction comes from, like the self-insert gratification of a lot of rationalist fiction comes from, is like seeing the character like exploit the hell out of their environment and their powers and stuff like that. In that sense, I think Worm is absolutely very rationalist-esque, rational adjacent. And I would say that Taylor, the main character, like, you could totally write a rationalist explicitly rationalist version of Worm, and it would probably go more or less exactly the same way, right? Like it would, like there was very few situations I can think of where I think the rationalist Taylor would do something better than the Taylor in the story did. So in that sense, I think that's why it's so popular amongst rational readers. And same with Unsong, like you were saying, where like, you know, the main character like has this opportunity drop in their lap, and their immediate thought is how to best exploit it. And that I think is a very rational thing to do. But the caveat here is that the world itself in both of these cases are, I think they're very close to rational, but are not necessarily so. Part of that comes, I think, from, I don't think the explicit direction that Wildbow was going for Worm obviously wasn't, because I don't think he was aware of the rational fiction in general when he started it out. But you don't need to be, right? You can still write a rational fiction without that. But my point is more that like he was writing a world that was as realistic as possible given the situation that he wrote it in. And I think he did a great job of making it what I would consider a rational world. But there was still some things that kind of didn't really work out that way. And Unsong is kind of the same way. Like Unsong is hilarious and very brilliant and witty, but the world itself is not exactly rational. And I think, assuming Alexander agrees with me, I'll be happy to let him expand on that. But if not, I'd be happy to hear why.
Yeah, I would describe both Worm and Unsong as rational adjacent. A lot of the stuff that Worm does, like if you watch like Saturday morning cartoons with like superheroes and supervillains, you'll see a lot of the stuff that you see in Worm, where people will they'll do a hit and like people will just get up from it. There's very little intent to kill going on, but in Worm, there are actual reasons behind that. I don't think the world of Worm fully holds up in a number of ways, and it's held together in 3 or 4 places by more wishy-washy stuff. There's some outcome pumps in terms of like, why do people not use their powers for mundane utility? Well, I mean, giant spoilers for Worm,
right?
would come from that, because there's some setting conceits behind that just sort of have to exist and don't necessarily exist for all that solid of reasons. But more generally, like if people, there's a lack of intent to kill because of this sort of established cops and robbers situation where people are sort of playing to satisfy their urges to some extent, and it was beneficial to people in control to create things this way. And then there are also Manton limits in effect to answer the question of, well, if you can create these like force fields that slice through solid steel, why are you not just doing that to kill people who are trying to kill you? Which you never see in like Saturday morning cartoons, because that'd be too horrific. But
which, by the way,
see in the real world,
right? Which are good mechanics to put in the world building. Like you want to explain these things in some way. It's not that it's bad that he included those. I think those are part of what makes the world of Worm so rational, is that like he has these explicit explanations for it. But
yeah, and I mean I disagree with Worm as rational mostly in the broader background. This is all the stuff that needs to be true to make this world as it is. I think there's some fuzziness there and some Scotch shape that shows a little bit. It's not like a problem for the work necessarily, but just I think how the world of Worm was created was that Wildbow had read a lot of comic books and had a lot of interest in superheroes, and then wanted to keep that keep the genre as intact as possible, and then went looking for ways to work backwards and make it so that was the case, which is why you get things like the Manton limit and some explanations for like why do people even go out in costume, right? That's one of the big, if you're going to write superhero fiction and you want to do it in a rational way, you need to answer that question. Like why are these people with these powers going out in capes to like fight or do crime? Why would a criminal attract attention to themselves?
Yeah, the heroes make sense. The villains is the problem. The heroes, the heroes could totally work out that way, unless you also want to talk about super competent heroes that don't care about fame and like law and are just basically, just doing the best thing they can secretly so that they're not drawing negative attention. But even putting that aside, the villains is the main question. Like, why are the villains so explicitly villains?
Yeah, like why are they in costume at all? Why did they go through the effort to be more recognizable? And Worm does have some answers to that as well, but I mean, you do also have to take into account Wildbow saying, like, this is not rational fiction, which I think definitely the author does apply, but without that statement, I'd maybe lend a little more lenience to it. Or if Wildbow had said, this is rational fiction, I would take that more as, I don't know, like an aspirational label, I guess.
I like that. Yeah, the reason I wanted to go first was I suspected correctly that both of your answers would be better than mine. Well, I mean, you guys are the experts at this. It was, I think, yeah, they like the whole cops and robbers thing. So, you didn't read all of Worm, but like basically the question is like, why are they wearing kid gloves the whole time? Some people, they might not be able to split each other in half with their powers. Alexander talked about I think you guys both talked about the Manton effect, which is like powers that can destroy things often don't destroy people or their caster or user or whatever. Like, for example, well, that's not a good example.
There are essentially arbitrary limits on what you can do with your power that intelligent, lethal intent people would really quickly exploit. So a really easy example of this that you see actually in some other fiction. Has anyone here read Aragon series?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, the Words of Death.
Yeah, so there's like this ability that's fairly common in all sorts of fiction called telekinesis. And if you the way telekinesis works is you can move an object with your mind. And you often don't actually need to even see the object directly. You just kind of apply force to things. Right? And so anyone who uses telekinesis to pick a car up and throw it at someone is an idiot. Because what you can actually do with telekinesis to kill someone is just kind of twist their neck a little bit and they die. That's the thing that all humans basically die from. And you can do it like really easily with telekinesis. You don't need to apply that much force at all. So why can't people in Worm do that if they have something like telekinesis? Because the Manton effect says so.
Yeah, and then the Manton effect itself has an explanation within the text, right? You could actually just stop at saying, well, Manton effect, and then the buck stops there, and you don't explain why the Manton effect exists. Worm goes a step further for that, but
which is why I totally think it's okay for people. Like I never really correct anyone if they say rational fiction like Worm. Like I'm happy to call it like that. I'm happy to include it under the umbrella. I think almost everyone who enjoys rational fiction would enjoy Worm. I think many people who might not even enjoy rational fiction would enjoy Worm. Like Worm is just a great fiction, and I think it can be applied the label either way. So I don't like think it's a flag worth like sticking on a hill and dying over.
Yeah.
But technically speaking, yeah.
I personally consider both Worm and Unsong to be rational fiction, despite their authors' protests. And the reason I have for this is, like I said, I've been for probably a good 2 years been trying to figure out what rational fiction is. And a few months ago, I was going through some of my fan mail because I did the Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality podcast, and it wasn't like often, but every now and then I would get fan mail, and it was like always really cool. It kept me going. It made me like happy that I was doing this thing. And I went through some of it, and I noticed like a big theme in at least half of them was people saying things along the lines of, I've always felt kind of like an outcast and that there was no one like me. And then I read this, and for like the first time ever, I saw myself represented in fiction, and it was amazing. And I kind of hate to use the word representation because I feel like it's almost been co-opted into the culture wars, which I do not like and do not want to get into. But I do think a lot of rational fiction does just come down to it's representational of my people and the way our minds work. And it's not really seen very often. We are a bit of a minority, but there is a certain way that our brains tend to interpret the world, and it isn't seen often. And when you do see it, especially when you haven't seen it for your whole life, suddenly it's this great and amazing thing that there's other people like you out there. And so to me, rational fiction is rational fiction that represents the life experience of someone with our sort of neuroarchitecture, which is why I think both of those count.
So kind of so kind of the sensation of like, if reading this makes me feel like part of the in group, then it's rational fiction to the rational fiction in group, which I think makes sense to a certain extent, because we are a subculture that is culture-y. Like, it's not strictly about always rationality, which I think you guys have both mentioned on this podcast a few times. Like, there's a culture to rationality, not just a thinking process or like set of axioms.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot the author on this, but someone said that they're comparing rationalism to different schools of fiction, and mentioned social realism as a artistic movement, and said that people involved in the socialist movement and that were heavily skilled and schooled in socialist theory, they would create their own art, of course, but they also went out after they had this genre and went out into the world to look for good examples of it, and maybe not like explicitly in those terms, but things that their community got excited by. And I think you said just a little earlier that you don't have to necessarily be trying to write rationalist fiction to write rational fiction, or rationalist. Sorry about the endings on those, but yeah. Do you guys? I'm assuming you agree with that. So what are some of the like earlier rational fiction works out there that you guys are big fans of and you think are, would be nice to co-opt with or without people's permission?
Okay, so I'm going to say 3. First is a lot of Charles Stross's stuff. He writes Laundry Files series is his big one, and then the Merchant Princes series is another one. And the Merchant Princes is sort of his take on portal fantasy and sort of like travel to an alternate world, except it's this like 33-year-old tech reporter, and she gets put into this world of Groin Market, which has all of these like, it's fallen into this development trap that she explicitly recognizes as such, and most of the series is her. Most of the first series is her trying to sort of like pull their culture that is this way for very specific reasons up out of it, which is like it's really neat to see. There's that same like focus on processes of thought and how systems are sort of constructed and put together. In his Laundry Files series, I think the most that I was ever like, this is rational fiction. There was one of his books was the Rhesus chart, and this Scrum team become programmers for high frequency trading algorithms. They become vampires, and they have these like Pert Gantt charts for like how they're going to deal with their vampirism. And they do all this like research and stuff, and they have like a burn down for it. It's amazing, but it's like exactly how you would approach that problem if you were those people with those like sets of skills and outlooks on the world. And it's all like, he does a ton of research. He's one of those authors that shows it a lot. So Charles Stross, mostly, not all of his works, and he has his own outlook on the world, which is reflected in his writing, obviously, as most authors do. The Jumper series by Stephen Gould, not the movie, which is kind of does its own thing, but Jumper is very focused on like what a person with these specific well-defined powers would do in that situation, and a lot of it is kind of a focus on cycles of abuse and stuff like that. But then the like applications of powers are all very well thought out in terms of how you would grapple with the limits. And then later books in the series include like going to space and stuff like that, and like deorbiting satellites, which is super cool and super like in the ways of thinking that I would expect of rational fiction. And then the last one was World War Z, or not World War Z, but the precursor to that, which was the Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks, which is it sets up its own very specific rules about zombies and how they work, and then goes through exactly how you would go about defeating those zombies, given the tools and training available to you. What are the outcomes of zombies being this way, this like specifically defined way? And then how do people deal with the outcomes? And it goes through first order and second order effects of like zombies and how to fight them and responses to them in a way that I think is very typical of rational fiction. And then World War Z, the book, not the movie, which was its own thing.
Again, just so bad.
Again, yeah. The book World War Z is sort of following that on a more like global scale and telling personal stories. It's a little less so than the first book, which is just, it's not even a narrative. It's just, these are zombies and here are how you fight them. I did all this thinking on the matter in book form. So those are my three that I'm going to co-opt.
Okay, so I don't know if these would necessarily be co-opted, but I would definitely feel like I was remiss not to mention Ender's Game. Ender's Game, I don't think is it's definitely not a rationalist fiction, but at the same time, I feel like I learned a hell of a lot reading it when I was 13, 14, something like that. All fiction, I think this is something that has been kind of an axiom of mine since I was old enough to really get into reading. All fiction teaches things. It's not that rationalist fiction is the specific only thing that like is written, not only is written specifically to teach, but it's not the only thing that you can learn things from. You should learn something from any fiction that you read, or rather you could learn something from any fiction that you read. I think rationalist fiction specifically just tries to teach things about cognition, thinking, winning, whatever that means in terms of like utility. What's it called? Utility rationality? No. I'm
instrumental rationality.
Instrumental, thank you. Instrumental rationality, that kind of thing. So Ender's Game just did a really good job of expressing to me what a child in this situation, super smart though he was, should actually do to overcome the challenges he was facing. And the world was fairly well put together. I don't think there are any plot holes in it as far as I can remember. Like I've read it at least 6 or 7 times. It's a pretty solid like book that leads to a couple fairly solid series that split off from it. But the first book itself, for sure, at least, is I think very well put together and does a good job of teaching what a thinky main character looks like. Shows what a thinky main character looks like. And again, like in terms of heroes that are prized for their intelligence over their might, or prized for their intelligence over their like ability to love, or whatever it is that like most fiction uses to save the day, Ender Wiggin is, has got to be up there in terms of traditional fiction. So Ender's Game is the first one. I was going to say World War Z also, actually, because World War Z is one of the first books I ever read that was just really felt like it did such a good job of describing what a worldwide phenomenon would look like from a worldwide perspective. There's a few things in it that's like a little bit like, I don't know if that's exactly how the military would react to this. Like it feels like the military in this particular circumstance was made a bit less competent than it should be just to get the plot going, or this part of the plot going in any case. But it was an example of how the military reacted, whereas other militaries for other countries reacted in different ways that were more effective. So it's like this is a failure mode that this particular military reacted to because of its culture. I don't want to spoil anything, but like it's a really good book. If anyone has read World War Z, by the way, World War Z is amazing. Even I would probably say it's my favorite piece of zombie fiction, and I think it is. And so yeah, seeing that in a story was really well constructed world with characters acting as they actually really would. I'd like to co-opt that then, if possible. Third one, I don't know if I really have a third one. There's a bunch of other things that, like a bunch of other books I could name, but I don't think I would really feel like they deserved the title. Or there would be parts of other books, I should say, that I think did really good job, like things like Dragon Riders of Pern. A lot of parts from Aragon. Actually, the Aragon series had a lot of really good world building and solid like explanations for why the world worked the way it did and all these things. And in particular, anyone who enjoyed, I'm not gonna say it's a spoiler. Anyway, I will just say that there's a specific part of Aragon series that I think is really shows kind of the best in terms of like what an intelligent character does when faced with a seemingly insurmountable problem. Yeah.
If we cut this, can you tell me what part that was? Because I really enjoyed those books too.
Yeah. So while I was reading HPMOR, the solution to how to deal with Voldemort came to my mind because I'd already read the Aragon series. And the solution was, if you can't kill the person, attack the mind, because the mind is something that they didn't necessarily think to protect as well as if they're so focused on invincibility. So the way Aragon beats, sorry, is this spoiler for? It's too late now.
Yeah, it's fine.
The way Aragon beats Galbatorix, who has spent like over 100 years layering magic upon magic upon magic upon ward upon ward upon ward on himself, who has like the combined might of like hundreds of dragons to draw upon, and all this bullshit like evil final boss stuff that you spent 4 books basically thinking like, how is he going to beat this guy? There's no way he's going to beat this guy, and he keeps getting stronger, but also he just never gets strong enough. It's literally like Luke Skywalker running at the Death Star with a lightsaber. Like it's not going to work, Luke. Like this isn't gonna happen for you. And that's the sentiment basically throughout the fight. It's like, yeah, he's really strong, but Galbatorix is way stronger. There's no way he's going to win this. And the way he wins essentially is by projecting like all the suffering that like Galbatorix has caused him like into his mind, so that he basically just has to like experience that. And Galbatorix never expected an attack from that perspective because like he didn't consider himself to be causing suffering in that way. Like he didn't really care. Like it wasn't something that he predicted would be used against him. So it's a way to like skirt around the security fence, or over the security fence, or whatever you want to call it, in the same way that Harry uses against Voldemort.
Awesome. Loved it.
Yeah.
There's been a few times in the past where people who were big fans of a budding genre like put together an anthology. I'm thinking specifically of Mirror Shades when Cyberpunk was first getting big, the first Cyberpunk anthology. Do you think there would be at all any value in like creating an anthology of the best like short rationalist fiction that's out there, whether the people are admitted rational writers or not? I'm thinking specifically Peter Watts, maybe some of his stuff, definitely some of Ted Chiang's stuff. Do you think there's any value in trying to go doing that sort of thing? Would anyone buy that?
Probably. I can't imagine it would be unpopular, like in the sense of people being upset about it. I think the major hurdle might just be getting all the people's like consent to put this label on their work, maybe. Since we're talking about like other authors outside the rational sphere. Yeah.
But like, I'm not even sure I would buy something like that necessarily, especially with all the other good rational fic that's out there all the time. So would either of you, do you think you would buy something like that if someone had put it out? Like, I'm seriously trying to gauge whether this is an interesting project. And as much as I like the idea of it, I don't think I would buy that copy myself necessarily.
I think anthologies are always a tough sell for me. I also think, like, if you look at the subreddit, most of it is dominated by long form, and in a lot of cases, extreme long form fiction that's like doorstopper length, if not longer.
That's the main thing that stops me from reading it. I just don't have the time to read that much.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I have so little time to read. But yeah, I've thought about, because I'm a mod there and I run the weekly challenge. I've thought about getting some of those stories together as like a compiled, I don't know, like 200-page. This is the best of the short fiction that's been published there, which I, in theory, have the social pull to do at least.
Oh yeah,
but it's a time investment for one thing. But
yeah, and to clarify, would you be thinking of marketing this towards like people who already read rational stories, or for the general public? Because that's what I was thinking of in the first place.
I mean, I would prefer for it to be the general public, so people would get an idea of what it is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is definitely going to be hard to do, I think, because you've got, first of all, people who are not familiar with why they should read this anthology in the first place. And you'd have to do something like put a fairly famous, fairly famous author. Like, if you like stories like this from this person, Martian's probably a good one to use. You would like these other stories from these people, right? And that might work. But yeah, it would be a tough sell to general public, I think.
For the record, that's what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well.
But
just the last part about the Martian. Everything else was too thoughtful for me to come up with.
But if it's something that you want to try in small form, what might be worth doing is, like Alexander was saying, like find the sorts of flash fiction that people can easily put together in like one work and be like, if you enjoy this kind of thing, try these out. And if enough people like it in like a downloadable $1 EPUB or whatever, you can use that data to then decide if a more ambitious project is worthwhile.
Yeah, it's sort of a marketing question, which I'm not super well versed in.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I write online is because I can't market for my life.
Yeah, I do it partly because the thought of like going through all the effort of traditional publishing is just so draining.
Kudos to
God.
you, by the way, Enyaq, but yeah, for that.
It is a fucking nightmare, let me tell you. It is constant rejection, and the worst part is, having written a novel, I cannot get anyone to read it because I guess I'm just not good at writing query letters. You send off this 3-paragraph little summary teaser thing, and then people are like, nah, not interested in seeing any of that. I'm like, God damn it! It's only 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, I've written 3 novels. I tried shopping around one of them, and it was just so frustrating that I just stopped. I was like, this is clearly a failure on my part that I need to readdress at some point in the future. But then I found the whole wonderful world of publishing straight to the internet, which it may not be the thing I want to do always, but for now, whee!
Yeah, I'm considering that more and more.
My strategy is just I'll become so popular that the publishers will come to me.
You. This is the Wildbow method. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm getting close.
Yeah.
It's worked for a few people. Hugh Howey, the Andy Weir.
Yeah.
Well, and now you've got the Bayesian conspiracy bump. I think that'll push over the top. So.
Right.
It'll really help you reach new audiences.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, Wildbow's fucking amazing in many ways, and this is one of the ways that he's managed to actually, I think, really hit it big time. I would not be surprised at all if 5 to 10 years from now there's an HBO series on Worm or something.
And his productivity is insane.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it for sure. The ability to write that much, but I think Alexander could actually get really close to that, if not match it.
I'm 100 words per day behind him.
Oh wow, nice.
As my running average of worth the candle behind Worm. So,
I mean, that's like saying that you're 5 seconds behind Usain Bolt. I think that's
yeah. I do write a lot.
I do not write nearly that much. My chapters are long, but they only come out once a month. And one day it would be great if I could try writing full time and see how that goes. But in the meantime, I gotta pay some bills.
We are going to direct link to both of your guys' stuff and the podcast on our post for this. But would you also like to say into the microphones what they are so people can hear it on the podcast?
Sure. I'm DayStar Eld online. So if you put DayStar Eld into pretty much any Discord, Skype, I don't know if it's advertised. It's too late. DayStar Eld is what I am online. So if you go to daystareld.com, you can find my website, and anything you might want to find from me would be there most of the time. Yeah, I'm working on that, consolidating it all there.
Yeah. And I'm Alexander Wales online. It's all the hits for that army. I feel bad for the people whose real name is that. I completely have dominated search, but alexanderwales.com is my website. So,
I mean, at least you're not like a famous cannibal or something. So, if you're gonna get a wrong result with Google when googling your own name, then I'd rather be some author than some bad news.
Yeah.
And both of them have Patreons for their stuff, and they are also doing the Rationally Writing podcast about writing rationally.
You guys have time to indulge me. I mean, now I've got 3 rationalist writers on the line. I really enjoyed the conclusion to Methods of Rationality, and if you haven't read it, skip this part. This will ruin the story, so this isn't just like, a minor spoiler. So this is the end of the episode for you, unless you are ready to have that. Anyway, is there a good consensus in the rationalist writing community, or maybe, I didn't see it on the Methods of Rationality subreddit, which I'm on, it's on my homepage and stuff. What is there a good canon explanation for why the graveyard scene went down the way it did? Why did the super intelligent Quirrellmort let Harry keep his wand? What the hell was he thinking?
I personally have never held that against him. He did need Harry to keep the wand to do the unbreakable vow. And at that point, Harry was already naked and paralyzed and surrounded by 12 Death Eaters that would Avada Kedavra him in a half second if he spoke in a non-Parseltongue language. So, I mean, if I was like a chief of police and I had a perp paralyzed, naked, and surrounded by 12 of my guys pointing their guns at him, I would also feel pretty safe at that point. I think it is a reasonable oversight, and I don't know, maybe he would have wanted Harry to demonstrate any spells that he was going to teach him. I just don't think it's that much of an oversight, honestly.
Okay, yeah, the spell demonstration actually makes sense for not like destroying the wand. But yeah, I mean, you're not just staring down a perp, you're a really smart guy staring down a world-ending threat, right? But no, I think you're right. Like, maybe that is, and I'm looking forward to your other two responses, but it could just be, hey, look, this is what happens when you don't cover literally all of your bases. And when you think you got them all covered, think again.
Yeah, there's this thing that I like to say a lot, which is anything's possible, but rationality is based on what's probable. Like, rational decisions are based on probability. There's always some chance that there's some crazy rabbit that your enemy can pull out of their hat. If you have actual infinite time and resources to plan for every eventuality, then sure, plan for every eventuality. But if not, you kind of just have to make a decision after a certain point that you've made enough effort to address all the probable and even a few of the only merely possible outcomes. And Voldemort wanted him to show him magic, and he needed his wand to show him magic, so that's basically why he let him keep his wand. I think if I was rewriting it, I might make it a little bit less obvious. Like, I don't know, I might do something like Voldemort.
Have him drop it and it touches his toe or something.
Right, like if there's some kind. So the thing that, remember that Harry didn't even, the thing that Harry used to defeat him was something that, as far as Voldemort knew, was literally impossible. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, he's too young to do that or something like that.
Right.
So to that extent, like, he did something that from Voldemort's perspective was literally impossible, and he had done a few of those before. So Voldemort shouldn't have been completely unprepared for him doing something literally impossible. But yeah,
I mean,
but also there's this.
Voldemort's only completely rational, absolutely safe action would be just to immediately kill Harry. Like, the second that he was no longer bound by the "we can't kill each other" curse, to murder him on the spot. But he didn't want to do that. He still wanted to interrogate him a little bit, and given that, he took all the reasonable precautions. At this point, he couldn't know for sure that even without the wand, that Harry could do wandless, wordless, insane magic.
Partial transfiguration.
Right. At that point, why couldn't he? If he could do it with the wand, why can't he do it without a wand? They're both equally impossible. So, yeah.
To give my own answer, this was pointed out during the final exam. Which was a wonderful time on the subreddit.
Yes, that was fantastic.
I helped coordinate some of it, especially on the subreddit, because I mod there.
Hell yes, you did. It was awesome. I remember the whole thing. It was great.
This was pointed out at the time, where some people were like, okay, like, I think the problem, the reason that comes up every once in a while is you have Voldemort going to such extreme measures in other ways that it somehow seems more realistic if he's less cautious, if there aren't 20 layers of precaution, right?
Extremes credulity after a certain point.
Well, yeah, like if you have if he is going to the extent of there's diminishing marginal utility on precautions that he's taking, right? And so if he's going to such an extent, then it becomes slightly less believable that he would not continue to go if he's going that far into the diminishing marginal utility of
like taking
precaution.
the wand is one of the lower hanging fruits.
Yeah, I think that is my, like, if I were rewriting it, I'd make Voldemort less cautious, because each thing that he does increases the amount of time that Harry's left alive and increases the room for prophecy to do something, right? And if you read prophetic stories, it's always the people who go to those extreme lengths that the extreme lengths are what backfire on them, I guess. It is one of the things that I think about that scene is that it becomes less believable to me because it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I was going to say also, there is this sense to me of like, I really enjoyed that whole period of time, and that I think the ending was great and all that stuff. I did feel a little bit, not cheated exactly. Maybe disappointed is too strong too. There was a little bit of something that the answer turned out to be essentially a method of violence that won him it. What I thought would work, what I thought would turn out to be the answer was some form of persuasion, was some form of like applied thinking to the problem in a way that like would make Voldemort realize that what he was doing was actually a mistake. And would I have been more satisfied if that was how he won? Like he didn't have the wand in his hand, like he wasn't given the wand. Voldemort basically said, "Look, you need to just describe how you did the magic. I'll figure it out myself. I've got time. Just describe how you did the magic. No wand for you. You don't have to show it to me. And I'll save. I'll spare someone for every secret you give me." And he figured out a way to win without using his wand. I probably would have enjoyed that ending better. Maybe, probably. Like it was a really neat trick, so maybe not. But at the same time, there's like a dozen other ways that Voldemort actually could have been defeated that he didn't plan for, depending on how thorough like Harry's pre-planning was, or Dumbledore's pre-planning was, or like Moody's pre-planning was. Like a Harrier jet could have fired a rocket at them from far away or something like that. Like he didn't have, as far as we know, right? We don't actually know, but like he didn't have some kind of ward up to stop like explosions. That was, I think, one of the threats Harry made about antimatter or something. Like he didn't have sentries posted like for, as far as we know, again, but it doesn't seem like it, because otherwise Harry wouldn't have known about them and then he wouldn't have won. Like he didn't have sentries posted for like all these outside the realm of probability outcomes. And so the low-hanging fruit was what got him in the end, but it could have just easily been something else.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, the main reason I was asking was, well, because I sort of just always chalked it up to like, well, I guess he didn't think of that. But I've got a coworker reading this right now, and I'm anticipating him asking me, what the hell happened there. And now I've got 3 great answers to give him. So awesome. That was very satisfying.
No problem. This has been fun.
Awesome. Yeah. You got anything else, Stephen?
No, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. I thought I'd kind of fall behind, and I'm sure that there's, stuff I didn't get, because I'm the only one here who doesn't write. I did write one thing that got like 11 upvotes on the Rationality subreddit once.
Congrats.
Yeah, I think it was one of the weekly challenges. It was the like Disney's Rationalist Disney or something.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
And I did a smart Aladdin. Well, my staff had a smart Aladdin. And basically the trick was that rather than just wish for more wishes, because that's against the rules, he wished away the rule that there was a rule against wishing for more wishes. Thus using 2 of his first wishes on more wishes, and then had infinite wishes at the end.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, Munchkinry is, the only thing I was like going for there. But yeah, like I said earlier with your job, but it's same thing with writing. Like I don't have the ability to just come up with things. I don't have like this story in me that's trying to get out. So I really love hearing people talk about the process, and this is a lot of fun for me. So thanks, guys.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you all.